Like, subscribe, and hype the video. Also, leave a comment on any topics you want to hear about in the future. Okay, let's dive in. What if everything you've ever seen, heard, felt, or experienced, every memory, every relationship, every moment of your entire life, is happening inside a computer simulation running on hardware built by a civilization so advanced that we can't even conceptualize how it works? That's not the plot of a science fiction film. It's a serious philosophical and increasingly scientific argument that has been made by credentialed academics, published in peer-reviewed journals, and publicly endorsed by some of the most prominent scientists and technologists alive today, including people whose opinions on technology tend to carry some weight. Today, we're walking through the simulation hypothesis from the ground up, where it actually comes from, what the strongest versions of the argument actually say, and what the physics of our own universe might or might not be telling us about whether any of this could be real. In our next episode, we're getting into the counter-arguments, the responses from physicists, and the deeper implications of what it would actually mean if it turned out to be true. Stick around for that one. But first, let's understand exactly what we're actually talking about. The modern, rigorous version of the simulation hypothesis traces primarily to a 2003 paper by philosopher Nick Bostrom at Oxford University, titled, "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" Bostrom's paper is worth understanding carefully because it's structured as a logical argument rather than a speculation, and it's more airtight than most people realize when they first encounter it. Bostrom's argument begins by identifying three possible scenarios, arguing that at least one of them must be true. First, virtually all civilizations at our current level of technological development go extinct before ever reaching the capability to run detailed simulations of conscious minds. Second, virtually all civilizations that do reach that technological capability choose not to run simulations of ancestral or other minds, for whatever reason. Third, we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation right now. The logic connecting these three options is this. If civilizations commonly survive to reach simulation-capable technology, and if they commonly choose to run such simulations, then the number of simulated conscious minds in existence would vastly outnumber the number of biological conscious minds, potentially by factors of billions or trillions. In that scenario, any randomly selected conscious mind, including yours, would statistically be far more likely to be a simulated one than a biological one. You'd need a very specific reason to assume you're one of the rare biological originals, rather than one of the overwhelming majority of simulated copies. Like, subscribe, and hype the video, because this is where it stops being abstract and starts getting genuinely personal. One of the most compelling aspects of the simulation hypothesis is how seriously you have to take the technological trajectory argument when you look at where computing has actually gone in a very short period of time. Consider that the entire history of electronic computing is less than 100 years old, and in that time we've gone from room-sized machines that performed simple arithmetic to smartphones that contain more processing power than the computers that guided the Apollo missions to the moon. Games and simulations have progressed from simple geometric shapes to photorealistic virtual worlds populated by millions of simultaneous users, all running on hardware that gets more powerful and more affordable every few years. Now extend that trajectory forward, not 100 years, but 1,000, or 10,000, or 1,000,000. A civilization even a few hundred years more technologically advanced than we are today could, by reasonable extrapolation of current trends, possess computing resources that are incomprehensibly larger than anything we currently have access to. A civilization millions of years more advanced than us, which, given the age of the universe, is entirely plausible for civilizations that got an early start, would potentially have access to computing power so vast that simulating an entire universe, complete with simulated conscious observers, might represent a relatively modest use of their total available resources. This isn't magic. It's an extrapolation of a technological trend that we're already observing in real time, just taken to its logical conclusion over very long timescales. Here's where the simulation hypothesis moves from philosophy and technology into physics, and this is the part that makes some physicists genuinely uncomfortable. Our universe, when examined at its most fundamental level, has several properties that are eerily reminiscent of what you'd expect from a computational system rather than a purely continuous physical reality. The universe appears to be quantized, meaning that energy, space, and time all seem to come in discrete minimum units rather than being infinitely divisible. The smallest meaningful unit of length, the Planck length, functions somewhat like a pixel in a digital image. Below that scale, current physics suggests the concept of distance itself breaks down. The smallest unit of time, the Planck time, functions similarly for temporal resolution. A simulated universe running on finite computational hardware would naturally have minimum resolution limits like these. You can't simulate infinitely fine detail on finite hardware, so you'd expect a pixelated reality at some fundamental scale, which is exactly what we appear to observe. Additionally, the speed of light functions as an absolute, unbreakable speed limit for information in our universe, something that's physically strange if you think about it from first principles, but makes perfect sense if you interpret it as a maximum data transmission rate imposed by the processing speed of the system running the simulation. Some physicists have noted that several features of quantum mechanics, including the way particles seem to exist in superposition until observed, bear a passing structural resemblance to computational optimization techniques, only rendering the full detail of a system when something interacts with it, rather than wasting processing power calculating the precise state of every particle everywhere at all times. Like, subscribe, and hype the video, and let's be clear about what this actually means and doesn't mean. This is the point where it's worth establishing just how seriously some credentialed, mainstream figures take this idea, because the public perception of the simulation hypothesis as fringe or science fictional doesn't fully match the intellectual landscape around it. Elon Musk, during a widely circulated 2016 interview, stated that he believed the probability of us living in base reality, meaning actual physical reality rather than a simulation, was only 1 in billions. Neil deGrasse Tyson, in a separate discussion at the American Museum of Natural History, put the odds that our reality is simulated at 50-50. Theoretical physicist James Gates, while working on string theory, reported discovering what appeared to be error-correcting codes, the same mathematical structures used in browser software and digital communications, embedded in the equations describing the fundamental physics of our universe, a finding he described publicly as genuinely unsettling. None of these people were claiming certainty. None were saying the simulation hypothesis is proven. But the fact that serious, credentialed figures across multiple fields are willing to put meaningful probability on this idea, rather than dismissing it outright, tells you something important about where it stands intellectually. It isn't fringe. It's genuinely debated, genuinely uncertain, and genuinely unresolved. One of the stranger implications of taking the simulation hypothesis seriously is what it suggests about the nature of consciousness and about the universe we find ourselves in. If simulations of conscious minds are possible, which our own trajectory of technology suggests they might eventually be, then the total number of simulated consciousnesses that could exist throughout all of time and across all possible simulations is staggeringly large compared to the number of biological originals. Bostrom's original paper specifically discusses what he calls ancestor simulations, detailed computational recreations of entire civilizations, run by more advanced descendant civilizations, either out of scientific curiosity, historical interest, or simple entertainment. If a civilization ran even a handful of detailed ancestor simulations, each containing billions of conscious minds, the simulated minds would quickly come to outnumber the original biological ones by enormous margins. This creates what philosophers call the self-sampling assumption problem. If you don't know whether you're biological or simulated, and if simulated minds vastly outnumber biological ones, then rational probability suggests you're more likely to be simulated. The uncomfortable implication is that simply being a conscious, thinking entity in a universe that could plausibly contain simulations is already mild evidence that you might be inside one, purely on statistical grounds. So here's where the simulation hypothesis stands as a philosophical and scientific argument: logically structured, technologically plausible, given realistic extrapolations of computing trends. Supported by some genuinely strange features of physics that resemble computational architecture, and taken seriously enough by credentialed figures across multiple fields that dismissing it outright requires actually engaging with the argument rather than just calling it science fiction. But there are serious, substantive objections to this idea, from physicists, philosophers, and researchers who've examined the argument carefully and found real problems with it. In our next episode, we're getting into every major counter-argument, the specific physics objections that have been raised, the question of what it would actually mean for how we live our lives if it turned out to be true, and the one implication of the simulation hypothesis that almost nobody talks about but that might be the most unsettling part of the entire framework. Stick around for that one. Like, subscribe, and hype the video so you don't miss part 2, and let me know in the comments. Do you think we're living in a simulation? I'll see you in the next one.